Broadcasting from New York City to the world, it's the G-Man Interviews.
Welcome. The following is an excerpt from a 2002 article written by Stephen Gray, a reporter and member of the National Association of Black Journalists, in recognition of the 30th anniversary of the landmark 1972 discrimination suit filed by 7 reporters against the Washington Post. The group became known as the Metro 7. In August, 6 former Washington Post reporters met at a colleague's home for a commemoration, not to mark the 30th anniversary of the break-in at the Watergate Hotel, but of a landmark Equal Employment Opportunity Commission complaint charging the newspaper with discrimination against its black employees. The case, believed to be the first of its kind against a major American newspaper, unarguably accelerated the hiring and promotion of scores of journalists of color. More important, it helped solidify the role of black journalists in the interpretation of contemporary American history. I'm proud to welcome Mike Hodge, one of the members of the legendary Metro 7. Mr. Hodge appeared on the show in 2013 to discuss the Washington Post case, his journalism career, and the current state of journalism in America. In addition to being a journalist, he's also an accomplished actor and representative of the Screen Actors Guild, now known as SAG-AFTRA. He joins us to discuss the recent controversy surrounding this year's Academy Awards selections and how it's impacting fellow actors and the film industry. Although Mr. Hodge is recognized and respected by his peers as an official within the New York division of SAG-AFTRA, he is solely commenting as an actor and proud member of the organization. It's nice to welcome you back to the show, Mr. Hodge.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here. Thank you for inviting me.
Have fellow SAG-AFTRA members contacted you to discuss this matter? And if so, what has been the general consensus?
Actually, nobody has called me. The general conversation that's been going on actually across the country, people are very much aware that the Oscars, and not just the Oscars, they're very much aware that Selma, which has been a highly well-regarded film, has been effectively shut out of the process, and nobody quite knows why. There's some thoughts about it, but it's all presumptive, if you will.
So, as far as your fellow actors, have you had conversations regarding the fact that for the first time since 1998, that actors of color have pretty much all been shut out?
There have actually been conversations about it. In fact, we actually had, I find this very interesting. You know, we have the SAG Awards. They're coming up the weekend of the 25th of January. And the diversity department, the members of the committee actually, not all, but the chairs from around the country, sent a letter complaining that there were not enough diverse films in the process. Now, not in defense of, but last year, if you recall, there were a tremendous number of black films, more than I think there have ever been in nomination or in consideration at all. And they went from having all these movies that were really phenomenal and successful last year to having the only one that I'm aware of is Selma, and having it left out. It just feels like, I'm not even sure how to explain it. To some degree, it feels like maybe there was a thought, well, you know, we took care of them last year, so we don't have to do anything this year. Although I doubt there were ever any conscious thoughts about things like that.
As far as you know, has the New York division of SAG-AFTRA attempted to address this issue in any way?
Well, I'm not sure that there's anything to address, actually. I mean, the only thing that for my taste, the only thing that would really make it less of a problem is if there were, more movies, more projects with people of color, not only in front of the camera, but behind the camera as well. And that's one of the things that helps make a statement about Selma and a lot of the other projects. The fact that Selma was basically not nominated in large part, I think they did get an Academy Award nomination for the movie.
Best Picture.
Yeah, when the Best Picture gets nominated, more often than not, the director also gets nominated because the picture is not the picture without the vision of the director. Ava DuVernay, the director of this project, been nominated. She would have been, I believe, the very first African-American woman to have been nominated. I was watching something last night. I think maybe it was Melissa Harris Perry, who noted that her absence was the 9th time a woman was not nominated for a project that they directed, even though the film did get nominated. So I think that maybe that's a reflection of the bias that exists in the Academy itself. The Academy members were 94%, I think it's down to 93% white, and a very large majority of the voters are male, and 62% is over the age of 62. And I make that mention because I think the concept or understanding of racial biases and racial differences varies greatly if you are older than it does if you are younger. It's very clear that kids who are in school today or have been for the last 10, 15, 20 years don't have the same kinds of biases that older people have. And I'm not saying that they're all active racists, but racism most often exists in the minds of people who have no awareness of it.
So basically, you feel that there's a major disconnect as far as the Academy members are concerned.
That's a good way to put it. Very much a disconnect. The other thing that you have to know, and this is one of the things that I think is very much at play, when you are a member of the Academy and you vote for projects, if you are listed as an actor, you vote for the actor category. When you're a director, you vote for the director category. What happens a lot is people vote for their friends because they all know each other. It's really a small, closed group. It's ironic to me, though, that it happens that the person who is the president, the head of the Academy these days, is a black woman.
Cheryl Boone Isaacs.
Yes, absolutely. Their election of her, there's two ways to look at it. One is it's an acknowledgement of their deficits. Or number two, it's a way to put a good face on what would otherwise be a very ugly picture. I'm not sure which. I would like to think it's an acknowledgement, but who knows? She has to be able to make changes. She says that she's going to try.
I want to follow up on that because, as you mentioned, she's the first black president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and she responded to the criticism by stating, "It matters that we pay attention to, again, the diversity of voice and opinion and experience, and that it doesn't slide anywhere except for forward. And maybe this year is more just about let's kick it in even more." Now, given that she said that, if you had an opportunity to speak before the Academy Board of Governors, what recommendations would you offer to try and make the selection process and perhaps the voting board as a whole more diverse?
You know what? I don't know as much as I probably ought to about the Academy, but I think once you get a membership, it's basically a lifelong membership. And I think that there should maybe be some means test of some sort that would not allow you to hold on to the membership or if nothing else, they could expand the membership and allow or invite people in who are younger. Right now, as I understand it, you must be invited in to be a member. Now, again, because it's a small community, and if you're invited in, and you have to have recommendations from one person who invited you, and I think there's several people who have to also commend you. It's still a small group of people generally in the same age range. That's not a way to create the kind of diversity that they need. They need to find a way to open up the pool, to change the admission requirements, to maybe look at a person's body of work. Because if you don't get a younger demographic in, you're always going to get stuck with this kind of problem until and unless the people who have that mindset are completely gone and only people who understand what the fulfillment of the promise of the American dream is completely, who are members of the Academy. That's going to take, another 20 to 30 years.
Back in 1996, People magazine conducted a landmark investigation of racism in Hollywood and published its findings in a cover story entitled Hollywood Blackout. A portion of the article stated, "With the Academy Awards 2 weeks away, we are taking an intensive look this week at one side of Hollywood rarely exposed to bright lights: racial discrimination. The exclusion of minorities from the film industry is one of Hollywood's dirty little secrets," says senior writer Pam Lambert, who wrote our cover story. Despite the stars all of us can name, once you get behind the scenes, blacks remain the most invisible men and women. 4 months ago, a team from People in Los Angeles began interviewing black and white actors, actresses, and filmmakers about racism in Hollywood. Our first reporting came from national correspondent Lois Armstrong, who in 21 years with People had already interviewed such prominent black stars as LeVar Burton, Billy D. Williams, Danny Glover, and Blair Underwood. Then, staff correspondents Ken Brailsford, Betty Cortina, Johnny Dodd, Linda Wright, and Paula Yu called 130 sources and gathered more than 60 interviews. Meanwhile, in New York City, reporting was coordinated by two of our newest senior editors, Maury McQueen, who joined People from the New York Newsday in October, and Howard Karen, who came from Premiere in January. Some of the most challenging sleuth work involved compiling for the first time minority employment figures from Hollywood's notoriously restrictive craft unions. What surprised me was the extent of hard data on minority employment which was still unavailable, says McQueen. Allegations of discriminatory practices by the entertainment industry are hardly new. It's startling that so little definitive research has been done until now. And again, this investigation was done nearly 20 years ago. Given this landmark report that's on record and the controversy surrounding the recent Oscar nominations, are you thoroughly convinced the situation will get worse before it gets better?
You know what? That's hard to predict. But I will say that the study that was done, I think it was a viable, valuable thing to do. But people do have an amazingly short memory, especially in this day and age. And Hollywood, again, it functions on the buddy system. And people who make decisions live in an insular world. And a lot of the omissions that happen, it's really, a lot of the problems that exist are a function of their omissions, their blind omissions. It's not necessarily active racism. I'll put it this way. When I first got out of college and I got a job at the Washington Post, I was extraordinarily excited because it was a great liberal newspaper. And I really wanted to work someplace like that. And I was shocked to discover that though the paper itself was liberal, it was actually occupied and run by many people who themselves were not. And I think Hollywood is effectively the same way. And it's not necessarily an active bias. You and I talked about Ben Bradley before. He was the executive editor of the Washington Post. And he wanted to do the right thing, but he had no experience dealing with black people, so he didn't always know what to do. Now, what was good about him was he was willing to acknowledge that he didn't know. So many people, and particularly in Hollywood, don't know and are afraid to say they don't know. When it comes to casting, when it comes to hiring, they're unwilling, because it's such a rat race, to acknowledge that they should be doing this, but they don't know anybody to bring to the table, in terms of reaching out to people of color, whether they're black, yellow, red, brown, whatever. They only know, for the most part, other white people. And that is the problem. And I was surprised the other day when I read the Sony hack scandal. Denzel Washington, as well as he does over here, he can lead a movie, he can open a movie, he can bring home millions and millions of dollars. But more and more, the industry is making its money overseas. And because of the innate bias that has been present in so many projects from over here to over there, the view that people, wherever they are over there, have of black people is the very same negative view that many white people have over here. So they don't want to see black people in the lead roles. When 12 Years a Slave was done last year, and it was an amazing film, I thought it was incredible. When it was going to be going to Italy, the poster that was designed to sell that movie had Brad Pitt on the cover. Now, there was a huge drama about it, and I think they had ultimately had to change it, but the people who were doing the advertising and promotion knew that it would not sell if there was a black person on the cover. But, they think that all black people are thieves and drug dealers and not to be trusted and dishonest, and because that's what is so often depicted on the screen. Which, however, as much as that is, there are other types that are being depicted now, thank God. When I first got into the business, it was all about drug dealers and murderers and gangsters and robbers and thugs, etc. And for me, it's so funny, I've gotten so tired of playing judges, but I played the entire spectrum on the legal side. So we went from being on the one side, the wrong side of the law, to being on the wrong side of the law or completely on the right side of the law. I've never played a thug or a drug dealer or a bad guy. I've often wanted to, but I started with, I played a street cop and went from street cop to desk sergeant to captain to commissioner to lawyer. But it's all about images. And a lot of people believe, even people in Hollywood, believe the images that they paint.
While the Academy has come under fierce attack from social media and the general public, and even members within the entertainment community, there's also a growing number of people that are defending the Academy's nominations and position by proclaiming Denzel Washington, Jamie Foxx, Forrest Whitaker, Halle Berry, Jennifer Hudson, Octavia Spencer, and other actors of color have been nominated for or won Oscars over the last 10 or 12 years. Your response?
I think that the argument that they make is not a valid argument. I do believe, I am grateful and pleased that there's been progress made, but that does not in any way excuse what's happening this year. Now, I will say, too, one of the things that I've noticed that is a problem, Paramount, which produced Selma, did not send out screeners because, this is the awards season. The SAG Awards, the Golden Globes, the Producers Guild, the Directors Guild, the Writers Guild, the Academy Awards. I know the SAG Awards did not get screeners. Paramount had a couple of screenings. You had to go out to a movie theater to see it. But usually when they do that, if you're on the nominating committee, you can only do that if you are in New York or LA. If you live anywhere else in the country, you can't do that. Paramount talks about having been disappointed that only about 4% of the nominating committee attended. Generally speaking, I did the nominating committee last year. There are so many movies to see. And if you get scheduled at the last minute, the last week or two before nominations have to be in, you don't have the time in your schedule because you've already committed to other things you have to see. And if they don't have the wherewithal to send you a screener where you can watch it at home on your own TV or in your own leisure, it feels like they don't care if he gets nominated or not. And then I found out that they didn't send out screeners to the PGA either, the Producers Guild of America. When the SAG Awards were nominated, the movie was not yet released. They just locked it right in the middle of the SAG nomination, so I get that. But when the PGA Awards were nominated, they'd been done. They could have sent those out, as far as I can understand it. I'm not sure if the Golden Globes got them or not, but I do know that Paramount could have done a much better job promoting this project. It makes me feel like, and I'm not saying this is true, but it makes me feel like they didn't care.
Now, you're citing Selma as the example, but do you know if this has ever happened to other films, but in particular, black films in the past?
I don't know that this has ever happened. What I do know that used to happen, and I could imagine to some degree it still does. The thing that has been the big deal has been the grosses, movie grosses. If you make a film, they will determine whether or not you can make another film for them based on the grosses that your project earned. What would happen when you go to a movie theater, one of those large, like 10 or 12 plex things?
Multiplex.
Multiplex, right. And you ask for a ticket to go see Selma. And they give you a ticket to go see Batman. Most people don't pay attention to the tickets.
I've heard of this.
Right. That became a big, big deal when people became aware that the ticket that gets sold is the one that gets the credit for that project. So the money that should be going into the pockets of the people who did Selma are going to the pockets of the people who did Batman. That happened for a long time, and then there was a huge hue and cry. I can't say that it doesn't happen still, but I do know that many more people are aware of it, and most people I know will not allow it to happen to them.
Who is to blame for that? Is that the studio? Who's pushing that?
No, that's the movie theater.
Reverend Al Sharpton has called for an emergency meeting with Hollywood executives and is considering what he called potential actions prior to or during the Academy Awards, which will be broadcast on February 22nd. If Reverend Sharpton calls for a national boycott of the Oscars, do you think SAG-AFTRA members, yourself included, would support a boycott?
You know what? I don't know. It's such an interesting idea because, and this is when you asked the question, made me really think about the Oscars. The Oscars is one of those things that is almost dated. Because it does skew to such an older crowd. They don't get the kinds of viewing numbers that they really want to get. The truth is, if we did boycott, I don't know if anybody would notice.
Yeah, but the Oscars is watched by billions of people around the world.
I know, but I guess what I'm saying is it depends on how big the boycott is able to be. And I don't have a dog in the hunt. There's not, I'm not invested in any of the projects that are up this year. And that's my point.
I would counter by saying becoming actively engaged would help to ensure that you will have a seat, for lack of a better term, at the table at the next go around. While you may have been left out this time around, and going forward, it may force the studios and production companies and even the Academy to think twice about allowing something like this to happen again.
I think that, you're right, but I think that actually all of the brouhaha that has happened to this point is enough to make them think twice. I really do. I've seen more print about this issue, more ink, and a lot of blowback that's been quite interesting to me. I knew that racism was not gone because I am a black man in America. I had no idea that we were still as racially divided as we absolutely are until this president was elected. And it has gotten over the years, while it's so easy for them to blame him for it, and he is not the reason for it. His presence, however, has allowed many people who don't like black people to become bolder about the fact that they don't like black people. But boycott, if it were able to be successful, would be really great. Truth is, in the scheme of things, with the cops and black people in general, that's a much bigger issue to deal with. And so having protests about that, I think, is a far more viable and important thing to do. Not to say that this isn't important. The Academy choices are not life and death. And the issue that I have with making it huge is because there was an incredible response last year. Not to let them off the hook this year, but there was only the one project that I'm aware of that was even able to be up. Now, it should have been, and it should have gotten more than it did. But I'm not sure what statement that makes, aside from the fact that they're negligent. Again, I don't think it was a willful fuck you, if you will. Had this been their modus operandi consistently for the last 20 years, I would say yes, a boycott would be deserved, and yes, thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of people boycotting that show is what they need. But this is a year in which a project was left out. I don't know that it'll get that much traction, particularly in light of the bigger issue of cops and black people. That's my point.
Are you surprised that there hasn't been more of a black backlash from more A-list black celebrities in Hollywood, particularly film stars, over this issue?
No, because anybody who is in Hollywood making a living, particularly if they're A-list, it's very easy for them to go to the DRF list. They know that it's not just black people. If you are on the A-list, anything can happen that can cause you to be on the F list or D list tomorrow, and you don't want to shake that. A friend of mine, this is some years ago now, was an up-and-coming actor, I won't call his name, through no fault of his own, walking down the street and got caught in some crossfire, got shot like 6, 7, 8 times. He survived. Now, when he was with one of the big agencies like CAA or I can't remember the other one, but one of those agencies, they do packaging, and they really were making him an A-list black actor. And the only reason he was able to survive is because he was a bodybuilder. So the bullets hit muscle tissue rather than going into his organs, though it took a while for him to recover. It took about 7 or 8 months. He had his own private parking space at his agency. That's what a big deal he was at that point. When he came back, not only was his parking space gone, but he'd basically been demoted. This is through no fault of his own. They did some work for him, but nothing like what they'd done for him before, and he had to move on. So if that can happen to you from something that you had no control over, they could actually wipe you out. Many people in Hollywood are just afraid to not follow the company line.
Is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
I think we made tremendous progress since I was growing up and in high school, in college, and early years in my career. We've made tremendous progress, but we have so much further to go. And the unfortunate thing is so many of the people who need to do the growing and the understanding and the learning, and I will say on both sides of the issue, actually have no idea that that's what they have to do. Where that is concerned, I have no idea where to start that conversation. Because if you don't know that you have an issue that needs to be dealt with, you're not willing to hear people who are trying to talk to you about dealing with it. You have to have an epiphany or something. That's all I can think about. I do think, though, that we will give us another 10, 15 years. I think we'll be fine. I thought we'd be done by now, but we're not.
It's been an honor, Mr. Hodge. Thank you very much for being here.
And thank you, sir.
That's going to do it for this edition of the G-Man Interviews. I'm the G-Man, and I thank you for joining me. Until next time, stay cool, stay safe, and stay informed.